So here's a question for you guys. How well do you actually know your parents? I thought I knew mine. I thought my dad was the salt of the earth type, a man whose word was as solid as the limestone under our family's 200-acre farm. But 3 years ago, he told a lie that destroyed our lives, and I'm only just now picking up the pieces. This is the story of how my father declared our ancestral home uninhabitable and the insane conspiracy I uncovered when I decided to fact-check him. Let's set the scene. Blackwood Farm has been in my family for 4 generations. It's beautiful, rolling hills, a creek that never runs dry, and an orchard that produces the best Honeycrisp apples in the state. Growing up there was a dream. But about 3 years ago, things started getting weird. My dad, who usually spent every waking hour in the fields, started spending all his time in his home office with the door locked. He stopped planting. He let the equipment rust. Then came the Tuesday morning that changed everything. I was 22 at the time, living in the guest cottage and helping with the harvest. Dad called a family meeting in the main kitchen. My mom was there, looking worried, and my younger sister Chloe was still in her pajamas. Dad looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. He threw a stack of papers on the table and said, "We have to leave, now. The farm is poisoned." He told us he'd noticed the livestock getting sick, which was news to me since our cows looked fine, and that he'd paid for private soil and groundwater testing. According to the report he showed us, the land was leaching high levels of arsenic and industrial chemicals from a defunct factory 5 miles upstream. He told us the EPA was going to condemn the property, and that if we stayed, we'd all be terminal within 5 years. I remember the absolute panic in my mom's eyes. She started crying instantly. Dad was adamant. We couldn't sell it for a profit. We couldn't even stay to pack everything properly. He said he'd found a specialized buyer who dealt with brownfield properties, basically a company that buys toxic land to rehabilitate it. They offered him pennies on the dollar, but Dad said it was our only way out of the debt. Within a month, we were gone. We moved into a cramped 3-bedroom apartment in the city, 2 hours away. My dad took a job as a security guard, and my mom fell into a deep depression. She missed her garden, she missed the air. Dad, on the other hand, became weirdly defensive. Every time I asked to see the full environmental report, he'd say he misplaced it during the move, or that the case was under legal seal. Fast forward 2 years. I'm working as a junior surveyor for a construction firm. I've learned a lot about land, soil, and more importantly, how environmental audits actually work. Something about Dad's story never sat right with me. Why wasn't the stream blocked off by the state? Why weren't the neighbors evacuated? I decided to do something risky. I didn't tell my mom, and I definitely didn't tell my dad. I drove back to Blackwood Farm. I expected to see a wasteland. I expected yellow caution tape and dead grass. Instead, when I pulled up to the gate, the farm looked incredible. The orchard was thriving. There were no signs of remediation, no trucks, no specialized equipment, just a brand new high-end security fence and a very expensive-looking SUV parked in our old driveway. I didn't go through the front gate. I parked a mile down the road and hiked through the woods, crossing the creek at the southern bend. I brought my own sampling kit, boring tools, files, the whole 9 yards. I took samples from the soil near the house, the orchard, and the water from the well. My heart was pounding the whole time. If Dad was right, I was exposing myself to toxins. If he was wrong, then what the hell was actually happening? I sent the samples to an independent lab under a fake name. The wait was agonizing. 2 weeks of sitting at dinner with my dad, watching him check his watch and take private calls, while my mom withered away in that tiny apartment. Finally, the email arrived. I opened the PDF, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped my phone. The results were clean. Not just passable clean, I mean pristine. The arsenic levels were lower than the national average. The water was some of the purest the lab had tested all year. There was no industrial runoff, no toxins, nothing. I felt a wave of nausea. My father hadn't just made a mistake. He had orchestrated a total abandonment of our heritage. But why? Why would a man who loved his land more than anything lie to his family to get them to leave? I decided to dig into the buyer. Dad had told us it was a company called Green Horizon Remediation. I searched the state business registry. Green Horizon was a shell company, and the registered agent? It was a law firm that specialized in mineral rights and oil and gas leases. That's when the pieces started clicking together. I spent the next 3 days at the county records office, digging through geological surveys that weren't available to the general public.
It turns out our farm sits directly on top of one of the largest untapped lithium deposits in the region. With the boom in electric vehicle batteries, that worthless, toxic land was actually worth tens of millions of dollars. But here's the kicker. Under our state's laws, mineral rights can be separated from surface rights. If Dad sold the farm as toxic waste to a shell company he was secretly a partner in, he could bypass the family trust. My grandfather had set up the farm so it could never be sold without the consent of all living heirs, which included my mom, me, and Chloe. But by declaring it an environmental hazard and a liability, Dad had used a legal loophole to disinvest the trust to avoid impending lawsuits. I was devastated.
My dad had sold our memories, our future, and my mother's happiness for a payout he didn't want to share. I didn't confront him right away. I needed more proof. I followed him one Saturday. He told Mom he was going to work a double shift. Instead, he drove straight to a country club 3 towns over. I watched from the parking lot as he met with 2 men in suits. They were laughing, drinking expensive scotch, and looking over blueprints. Blueprints for a massive mining operation on our land. That night, I waited until he got home. We were all in the living room. I didn't say a word. I just turned on the TV and plugged in my laptop. I projected the lab results onto the screen. "The soil is clean, Dad," I said. The silence in the room was deafening. My mom looked from the screen to my dad. "What is he talking about, Arthur?" she asked, her voice trembling. Dad tried to bluster. He tried to say the lab was wrong, that I was being a know-it-all kid. But then I pulled up the business registration for the shell company and the map of the lithium deposit. "You didn't move us to save us," I said. "You moved us so we wouldn't see the drills coming in. You lied about the poison so you could break the trust and keep the mineral lease money for yourself." I've never seen a man deflate so fast. He didn't even have a backup lie. He just sat there staring at the floor while my mother realized that the last 2 years of her misery were a choice he made for her. Mom didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She just walked into their bedroom, packed a suitcase, and told him if he wasn't out of the apartment by morning, she'd call the police and report the fraud to the state attorney general. Since then, it's been a legal nightmare. Because the sale was based on a fraudulent environmental report, our lawyers are fighting to void the transfer of the land. It's a massive he said, she said, but having the clean audit from an independent source is our smoking gun. My dad? He's living in a motel. He lost the payout because the shell company's contracts are being frozen during the investigation. He traded his family and his reputation for a pile of money he'll probably never see. We're hoping to move back to the farm by next spring. My mom goes there sometimes just to sit in the orchard. She says the air doesn't taste like poison. It tastes like home. And as for me, I learned a valuable lesson. Trust your gut, do your own research, and never assume that the people who are supposed to protect you don't have a price. If you're going through something similar, or if your parents are acting shady about a family inheritance or property, check the records yourself. Don't take their word for it. Sometimes the biggest snakes aren't in the grass. They're sitting at your dinner table. Anyway, that's the update for now. We're still in the middle of the lawsuit, but things are looking up. Thanks for listening to my story. If you want to hear more about how the legal battle goes, let me know in the comments. I'll keep you guys posted.